Welcome everybody to another one of our seminars on digital rules and human values. I'm Paul Toomey, one of the co-chairs of GUIDE. And today we are discussing particularly the application of AI in Latin America and what role can Latin America play in coalition-based AI governance, a new form of governance along the lines we have often discussed. I'm joining you from Rome, where I'm here this week, which is the Pope's encyclical related to AI came out on Monday and seems to be the topic of discussion internationally this week. So it's certainly a buzz here, and hopefully we'll have a session to discuss that in more detail coming forward. The issue of coalitions and who are the players who are going to drive the next round of discussion of governance for digital data, and particularly as it relates to AI, is an increasing area for discussion. Obviously, Mark Carney started this off in the public discussion arena at the World Economic Forum earlier this year. And so we've been very interested in that as a topic, and particularly as it has, not just for sort of related to North America, but particularly how does it relate to Latin America. Julia Pomares is the head of head of GUIDE in Latin America. And I'm asking Julia, she's put together this session, perhaps to introduce the speakers and to give us the background of what we're going to talk about today.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for joining us today. The idea, as Paul was anticipating, is to have a discussion about what Latin America is doing in different arenas. And I think it's a very honor to have Antonia Moreno from CENIA today here, and also Alejandro Pisanti, another GUIDE member from the region. And I think, Antonia will talk in a minute, and she will tell you in more detail, but I would say that maybe she won't say it, that CENIA has established and positioned as one of the key global actors in coordinating action and research in AI, not only in Latin America, but I think building a model of collaboration that I think it's very useful to understand, because it can be very interesting avenue to pursue in other regions. And I think also because of the stability of the last years at CENIA and the idea of following, especially with the index, that is a more important source to understand what is going on and what are the trends of AI adoption, development, and AI research in the region, is ILIA's, the CENIA's ILIA. So I think it's very important to have her here and to have her view about how they develop these instruments and what they can tell us about the region. And I think another important aspect of CENIA that she will get, I think, and tell us in a minute, is about LatamGPT, that it's a very ambitious initiative to build on an LLM built on sources from the region and Latin American Spanish and all the differences that we have within the region. So she will start the conversation, then I will try to position the agenda in terms of the AI governance developments, and I think I will try to get a bit in detail into Brazil. Brazil has been very active over the last, especially the last year, but in terms of AI governance, and I think it's very important to understand what they are doing, because they also not only they have an influence in the region, but also globally. And I will try to share some thoughts to discuss with the group about what is the role of Latin America and what role we can play. And then Alejandro will join us from Mexico City, 7 a.m. there. So thank you, Alejandro, for waking up so early to give us the view from, especially that close to the US, and also so important in the relations with the US. I think that the views from Mexico and how you are seeing this dispute between China and the US, but also the role of Latin America more broadly. I think the idea is to have the first three interventions by the three of us, and then open the discussion with all of you. So that's the plan for today. Thank you again for joining us. I know that there are people from different countries also people from Latin America. So we will be very happy to have your views after we go to this round of presentations. So with no further ado, Antonia, the floor is yours, and very happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us from Santiago, Chile.
Thanks, Julia. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to hear with all of you. I'm Antonia Moreno from the Chilean National Center for AI. I'm gonna share my screen and start my presentation. So when we think of AI, or most of all think of AI, we feel kind of like this in this video, a huge wave that is coming over us, and we don't really know. We don't have the time to react. But when you start to learn about the sea currents, the fact that waves coming in sets, and maybe we can swim, these interactions or this universe feels friendlier. So this is what we do in CENIA. We connect people with AI through research, frontier research, tech development, to connect companies with AI adoption, human talent, in the way to promote the adoption in companies or people in their houses, and advocacy that is based on a strong evidence that we made from our own studies, like the Latin American AI Index, which is one of the projects that I'm gonna share with you today. Collaboration is a key.
To interrupt you, I'm seeing a message in your screen. I don't know if
sorry.
all of you are. So
yeah,
I think
I'm gonna wait. There is a problem. Okay,
hide it.
Here is. It's okay now or not? Here.
Yes.
Okay. Collaboration is a keyword that that guides our work. We CENIA has almost 5 years, and in all these years we have built an important network of collaboration from all over Latin America and also in other parts of the world. And this is why we are able to develop our projects, ILIA and LatamGPT, which are mostly collaborative works. And those are some of our partners in, for example, ILIA or other projects, which are universities, tech companies, international institutions, and so on. Latin American AI Index shows or measures the state of AI in Latin America, in 19 countries of Latin America. And this year we are working in the 4th edition. It is a public good that we developed with the help of ICLAC, ICLAC, which is the Economic Center for Latin American Studies, and with another institution that help us in this huge work. It's aimed to provide data for countries in order to take this and define their strategies in the tech strategies. We work with this whole group of people. They are our advisors from these 19 countries, and even if this project is led from Chile, this group of people help us to validate information, to connect with locals, provide the sort of information, and so on. So it's a very collaborative work. Very, very fast. The index is structured in by three dimensions: enabling factors, that is about infrastructure, data, human talent, compute; research, development, and adoption; and governance, that told us about how countries are structuring an AI that is ethic and safe for its citizens. This is the these are the results of the ILIA 2025 that show us how countries in region are running. We divide the results in three. The first are the pioneers, adopters, and explorers. Chile, Brazil, and Uruguay are leading this, and we don't want to call it a ranking because we don't try to make a competence between countries. We want to collaborate, to push the collaboration with them. So, but at the end, we have how country is doing, how every country is doing, and what we see, which is very interesting here, is these white spots are the show us those countries that increase the most from one edition to the other. And it's something that it's repeatedly, we can see it all over the 102 sub-indicators through this index. So it's very interesting how countries are, and this is the change or improves from one year to the other. I'm going to share with you some of the key findings, which are the most important topics that arise when we speak about AI in Latin America, which is data. Latin America, the region, provides a lot of information of data from public and private sectors. And we see improvement in governance capacity, but in availability is not improving, and it's a risk because there's no data to train or AI models. And also, there's an unknown to what data is that we want to share or we need to share. So we are highlighting the importance of share and provide data, and this comes also with our experience from LatamGPT, which was a huge data sharing, and I'm gonna tell you in few slides more. Human talent told us about how region is doing in literacy, professional trainings, and advanced human capital, and what we can see in almost all the region, with some exceptions of Chile and Uruguay, but it is a very like a pyramid. The literacy is the double of professional training and 4 times advanced human capital, that show us or told us about that we are losing people in the field, and we want to highlight this. Also, this is a very in human talent fields, there is a very interesting concept that is arising, which are the courses provided by platforms like Coursera. This data is provided for us to Coursera and show us the main enrollments in AI courses, in the 100 more popular. And what we can see is Colombia is leading this phenomena. But also what is important to see here is that these small courses are arising as an option and valid option or a good complement to the academia, because they are able to deliver these skills that are changing semester or quarters or over years, but very fastly. And people need these skills, and they are able to provide it. So it's very interesting how human talent is having new opportunities. Also, there is important here the evolution of time of talent in concentration of Latin American and Caribbean versus the global North. What we see here is this group of this is all Latin America and Caribbean. Here is Costa Rica, which has a different path of growth, and the other line is the other rest of the world. But when we include here, sorry, but it's very clear. Here is another line that shows us Israel, Luxembourg, Estonia, Canada, and India. What we can see here is the region, and there is a huge gap between these countries from the others from the global North. And also what we can see is where Latin America is now is not where even the other countries were in 4 years ago. About compute, Brazil has more than 19% of the compute power of the region, following with Argentina, Mexico, and Colombia. But what we told us is that this capacity is very is owned by just one country. So the region has not the power to develop its own AI. It is a huge risk, and what we see from CENIA, that is a very huge opportunity to promote a compute grid, which is a project that we are working on in order to coordinate and provide time computing or hours of computing around the region in a collaborative way. About generative AI and the paradox of it, Latin America is the third market share of AI, of applications, downloads of application of AI generative. But when we move to the investment, what we can see is Latin America private AI investment is the 1.1% of the investment around the world. So there is a huge gap between adoption and interest in the region in AI generative and what is private investment doing. So there is we see here a huge opportunity that is not been seen by now. About research, it's very concentrated by few countries, Brazil, Mexico, and then Colombia, Chile, and Argentina. And it's repeated in researchers, active researchers, and participation in main conference. So also we can see a very segregated region in terms of research, which is critical for the future develops or innovation. About open source, it is a huge opportunity for region. What we can see here is data from that share us GitHub that show us how region or developers of the region are collaborating by themselves, and arise another important concept that I'm been repeating all the time, which is collaboration. And it's a way that we can see, and we've been explored in CENIA through ILIA, which is a project that it's not possible to make without collaboration, and LatamGPT, which is the other project that I'm gonna tell you very fast right now. If you want to see more in details the index, here you can download it. There is a full report. There are also small parts for each country that is part of the index, so you can see like summaries. About LatamGPT, LatamGPT is a large model trained by only Latin American and Caribbean data, led by CENIA, but developed with more than 70 institutions from all over Latin America and Caribbean. It's a huge collaborative work that we launched on last February. It's a public good, open source, of course, and today has more than 70 billion of parameters. When we see a map of the number of notable AI models, we can see the lack of representativity of the region. And this is why the importance this is maybe answers why a large model from Latin America. And another, this is before the development of LatamGPT. Alvaro, our director, was exploring, and he started chat with some AI and asked it, what is a Chilean? And it answers some characteristic of Chileans. But then when he asked, show me one, the AI showed this feature. So what show us is there is a huge bias of the region for outcomes and underrepresentation. Also, the map of the site shows the underrepresentation of region. LatamGPT is a very interesting project that also changes us as a region, the position from observers to developers. And it's a huge opportunity to understand or to be part of this discussion in the global discussion and continue developing and putting the region into the AI map. It's a huge work. We are still developing. If you want to know better, please go to this web. There are the resources that you may the free resources that the open source that we have, so you can understand better. And here is my mail if you wanna in touch with me.
Thank you, Antonia. Thank you so much. I will share my screen. Hold on, I will try to make it presentation. Yeah, there it goes. Great. So I would like now, based on what Antonia shared with us, to give some thoughts on where the region is in terms of AI governance, and then to situate it within the US-China competition and offer some thoughts about what role can realistically play in coalition-based governance. So if you look at the region's trajectory, I would say that there are two distinct phases in AI governance in Latin America. The first is about AI strategies itself unfolding in two waves, and the second is about binding legislation. The first wave of national AI strategies emerged between 2018 and 2021. Mexico was the first mover in 2018, followed by Colombia, Argentina, then Uruguay, though only applied to the public sector, and then Chile, Brazil, and Peru followed in 2021. Several of these strategies of this first wave were largely aspirational documents. They declare priorities, identify sectors, signal political commitment, but most lacked enforcement mechanisms, implementation plans, and more important, dedicated budgets to this. And in particular, Peru's, Argentina's, and Mexico's strategies were never implemented or enacted in any meaningful way. But then we had a surge of a second wave after ChatGPT was launched. And in this case, now we have several countries. CENIA also includes Cuba here. I didn't. And in the case of Argentina, I'm only putting here the 7 ones that are actually in implementation, that are the ones that you can see there. And the U is for update because there were updates of the first wave. And I think that this wave came with something that the first one largely lacked, that was money. In the case of Brazil, the strategy commits more than $4 billion over 4 years. In the case of the Colombian, around $100 million through 2030. And then there is budget in the Chilean one, but I would say that in some of these cases we are still lacking the dedicated budget for these strategies. And I think importantly, this second wave of strategies ran parallel to the start of legislative debates, following the debate in the EU, but in other countries around the world. As you know, the Latin American region was quite with the Brussels effect in terms of GDPR. And at the beginning, there was this big question about whether we will be having a Brussels effect in this case. And I would say that for the time being, the answer would be no, but we can get into this discussion afterwards. But Peru and El Salvador are the only countries we could label as general laws. And in the case of Chile and Brazil, they started very lengthy processes. They got approvals in one of the chambers, but the process is stalled. And at the same time, and I think this is important, is that we started having, instead of waiting for comprehensive AI frameworks, countries are starting to pass single issue laws. I put some here. They're not all, but I think the most important ones. For example, Colombia, the use of AI as an aggravating factor in identity impersonation. I guess Alex will go into detail into the AI and performance rights with the dubbing actors in Mexico. So whether it's because of public opinion demands or maybe in the case of Mexico, union lobbying, we are having this important movement now of single issue debates. And I think the case of Brazil is especially of interest here because it's because of the big, as Antonia was saying, like 90% of the specialized compute power is in Brazil. We don't have to stress the importance of Brazil globally. So I will make a brief zoom on two very important developments that stand out. And those are from the last months. Interestingly, and maybe paradoxically, just a week before the landmark New Mexico jury verdict condemning Meta in the US for misleading consumers about child safety on its platform, a ruling that exposed the absence of the standard of what a safe platform actually means, Brazil's digital ECA, as it's known in Brazil, entered into force. And with exactly that, the binding definition of what safe by default looks like for minors. It's a very ambitious legislation. I think that the key issues here is that first, that it's applied to any service that it's likely to be accessed by minors. So it's a very broad definition, and obviously regardless of where the provider is located. And it has they cannot have a simple self-declaration as a valid age verification method. So it opened a big debate about the different verification methods that are going to be implemented this year for this. Loot boxes in games accessible to minors are prohibited. Behavioral profiling for target advertising is banned. So this is a very big move by Brazil in a very big market globally. And I think a very important also second development has to do with the use of AI in elections. In Brazil, the judiciary, the Supreme Electoral Court has regulatory powers in this realm, so they don't need a legislation passed by the parliament to have new rules on the use of AI in elections. And I think one of the most important parts of the resolution that was approved a couple of months ago is like a full blackout of new synthetic content that it has to be applied 72 hours before and 24 hours after the election day. As you can imagine, it's something that it will be very difficult and it's a very big challenge to implement. So I think that, and also another important thing of this piece of legislation is that AI providers are now prohibited from recommending or ranking candidates to voters, whether it is on ChatGPT or WhatsApp. So it's also a big change for the platforms, and both regulations pose major implementation challenges. And it's already getting a lot of debate in Brazil, so I think they're worth following closely. So my second part here is building on what is going on in terms of the AI governance, is to share some views about how LATAM is being positioned within this fierce US-China competition. And I think the big question here is if hedging is still an option, and the strategic hedging that the region used to have between China and the US. And I think that the picture is shaping very fast. For years, China held a prominent position across multiple layers of the tech stack. Critical minerals, just Chinese investment is deeply entrenched, 5G infrastructure, surveillance and IoT hardware also are very important in government and security applications in the region. But the last couple of years, the United States have become significantly more active and aggressive in contesting that space. So the shift is visible at different layers of the stack, on critical minerals, but also on connectivity. Maybe you heard of this, but there was a proposed trans-Pacific submarine cable between Chile and China that became politically charged to the point with dispute between the Chilean government, the previous Chilean government, and the US in terms of visas for some officials, and the project is now on hold. And probably, well, we don't know what is going to happen, but I think it's an important signal of the change of the US. And also, and I think more importantly, on the downstream layers, hyperscalers, cloud infrastructure, foundation models, the picture was already American, and it's getting more American with the foundation models after ChatGPT. It's capturing the growth of downloads of applications almost everywhere in Latin America. There's also the use of DeepSeek in the region, but the influence of ChatGPT is quite important. So I think that against this background, Latin American governments are facing a question they can no longer defer, that if hedging is still an option, how they can how can they define room in maneuver, and how they can build these coalition-based strategies, taking into account this picture that is taking place, at least at the moment, and with all these geopolitical tensions going on. So finally, and based on what is AI governance in the region, what is the role of LATAM within this competition, I would like to make some points for the debate with you about what role for LATAM, and open the discussion about this. I think that the stakes are real, and I think Antonia was what she showed was very, very persuasive in telling us that the stakes are high. The asymmetry between our share of GDP and our share of private investment, there is a lot to increase there. Also, we have a very important productivity deficit for decades in the region. So the possibility of a leapfrog, it's not an abstraction. Can be hopefully the difference between a development trap and a way out. So I think that capturing the potential requires moving fast and on different fronts. And I will try to highlight these 3 or 4 here. The first is adoption. And I think that what Antonia showed us, point us to the big advantage in terms of open source models, in terms of AI literacy. So the spreading adoption across different sectors, not only in the private sector, but also in the public sector. I think it's a very important advantage that we have to take over the next years. The second one, and it's quite debated, but I think that it's a clear opportunity in AI infrastructure, that we have to find a way to attract infrastructure investment on better terms than the region has historically managed, but to get it, not to avoid it or isolate from that discussion. From my view, the lesson from Porto Digital in Recife in Brazil showed us that data centers can also generate spillovers in connectivity, in skills, in startups, deployment. So we need to find a way to embed these infrastructure investments in existing innovation ecosystems and scale those innovation ecosystems. But I think that the AI infrastructure is an important avenue to pursue. A third front, and I think that also taking the example of CENIA, is to scale cross-learning. We have some cooperation going on, also KIPU in academia, the ministers meeting promoted by UNESCO and CAF. I think that we need to use those existing institutions to scale more and accelerate cross-learning in all these AI governance experiments that we are taking in the region, but also experiences in AI infrastructure, and how we can cooperate better on that realm. And I think, and finally, this a pragmatic coalition building strategy can go beyond the region. We already have some examples with multilateral coalition models already taking place in critical minerals. Chile has an agreement with Canada. Argentina signed one in 2025. I think that the possibility of having more small coalition building around specific domains, whether it's AI data sharing agreements, compute access, or regulatory mutual recognition, I think something that Paul, Vicente, and Dennis are also working on, and you mentioned on our last episode about how to build this coalition-based governance. I think there is room for the region to build that. So the window, I think, to have a more flexible, informal, or more strategic cooperation rather than rigid multilateral frameworks for all the region that would be impossible at the moment. I think it's open and it's real. And the question is whether the region moves fast enough to use it and to take advantage of this moment here globally. So I'll stop here. Thank you. And I'll give the floor to Alex to have his thoughts, and so we can have later a conversation, all of us. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, and that was brilliant. Really not up to your level or Antonia's. Very briefly, I want to mention some qualitative issues. First of all, and thanks, Antonia, for the work you're doing with the index for Latin America. One has to be very careful, especially in Latin America and in developing countries, I would say in general, Africa or South Asia would also apply, that getting high grades in the rankings or in the assessments for governance comes cheap. It's very easy for our countries because there are lots of things that you just need to write them and maybe to publish them, legislation, regulations, plans, strategy documents, everything. I mean, you can write them in an afternoon and publish them. And in some places you can actually enact them into law, and then nothing happens because there's no way to bring them to reality. Second thought here is that I'm very worried about focusing on AI in a way that we don't realize that we are focusing only on LLMs, chatbots, on these interactive large language model-based developments, which of course are extremely important and are the ones that are able to attract more capital and to exert more influence in society. But we should not forget about things like, protein folding, machine learning used for recommendation engines, machine learning used for all kinds of data analysis for climate, seismology, which is very important in countries like Chile and Mexico. There's lots of science. Then there's lots of uses in marketing, which are not transparent at all because they are black box packages used by companies or very small consultancies, which do know what they're doing, but they are doing credit card campaigns and stuff. There are a few companies there's a lot of good brains in the region, and many of them, as Antonia has illustrated, are already moving outside the region. The talent moves fast to the US. In particular, it's attracted to companies where they get very high salaries, very good conditions of living, even these days when people are thinking twice of going to the US or eventually to Europe. But, our friends working in companies like Databricks, companies we don't hear because they are not open AI, but they are the things behind. And they also are in the business of developing algorithms and providing the infrastructure for what we see, for what the public sees. These big brains, these good brains are well trained. They have good engineering or mathematical training, and they don't find either venture capital to get startups running or good institutional frameworks where they can work at universities or private research centers. The market for Spanish language is huge. I mean, if you consider Spain, Latin America, and 30 million Spanish speakers who are immigrants into the US or their descendants, that takes you to many more. It's a huge market, and it has always been tried people have tried to access this, for example, from the publishing industry, and never quite gels. At this moment, things like Julia was mentioning, for example, the relationship with China. There's a divide. There's a block of 5 countries which are friendly with China, which are the sort of more left-wing governments. And even there, Mexico, for example, is being pressured by the United States very strongly to limit its engagement with China because the US sees Mexico being used as a backdoor for Chinese products being built under the North American Treaty rules of origin, so they can be stamped as made in North America, but they are hugely Chinese goods. So there's a lot of pressure there. We are renegotiating the North American Treaty as I speak, and the pressure from the US to exclude China is very strong. On the data availability, of course, data in Latin America, I think, is generally disorderly. We have very strong data protection laws. We have out-Spanished the Spanish in data protection laws. They are stronger, and the penalties for violations are much stronger. So that doesn't protect data as much, as it inhibits development. Data protection is still very weak in practice, but larger companies just don't dare do things that would get them into trouble. And we do have a few startups that are brilliant. They do have large NVIDIA clusters, some of their own. They are doing things. One company in Mexico called Celestial Dynamics, for example, has a digital twin of the whole population, and they use it for, the services they sell, the money they make is for running campaigns based on these very detailed demographics. But it doesn't gel into something that's a lively industry. Coalition-based governance, on the other hand, can benefit from the Latin American input in the sense that countries like Mexico, Brazil, and Chile, and in some periods Argentina, work as hinge countries. They are the countries that can bring in voices into negotiations in the UN framework, in multilateral and small multilateral frameworks, but particularly they are like voices of moderation and negotiation in the larger realms. And that's a role they are very proud to take and to perform. And again, it's hard when it's raw superpower competition between the US and China. When you bring in Russia for some of the very strong geopolitical issues of the day, then they shrink, but they are still important in this sense. And finally, as Julia and Antonia have mentioned, there are laws coming out that are more by sector, what we call verticals in some other countries. Instead of waiting for a huge general law, Julia asked me to mention the law that performers have asked and obtained in Mexico, which limits the application of AI in things like film and television series dubbing. There's a very strong dubbing industry because of this huge market in Latin America. They master something called neutral Latin American Spanish, which means it's a pronunciation that everybody feels wrong, but it doesn't feel local to anyone. And that enables serious TV series or films to be sold out. They are very concerned that artificial intelligence will take their jobs away because it's very easy if you have especially if you have the script in English, in the original language, to have it translated and put into voices. The voices are even more similar to the original actors, can actually simulate the original actors. And they have a very strong collecting society. It's not labor unions, Julia, but the collecting societies that have this power. And they already have a law that inhibits, I won't say completely forbids, but inhibits the use of AI. It has been very strongly criticized by legal scholars because it actually protects people less by protecting this small guild of professionals. Everybody else is less protected because in Mexico, as in few other countries, not in many, things like voice and image are protected under intellectual property laws more strongly than they are under civil law. And I think I'll stop there to leave the room for questions. I hope this is useful. One last point, very qualitative, and I would almost like to say this off the record, but I can say it on the record, is Latin America, in words of some informal analysts I respect very much, suffers from mediocrity, suffers from being in the middle. We're not, to say it very roughly, we're not poor enough like countries in Africa to deserve full assistance where people will not try to recover their investments, and we're not strong enough and good enough to be an autonomous power. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Antonia, for your presentation. Let's open the floor. I don't know, Vicente, if you want to intervene here.
Yeah, I can start, or Finn has raised his hand.
Sure.
No, you go ahead, Vicente.
I have a real quick question to Antonia, actually. I wanted to know what the reception of your work and also what kind of collaboration have you received from other governments in Latin America, and also from big digital champions like Mercado Libre or Cencosud and so forth. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, we have a very different kind of collaboration with them. For example, for governments in LatamGPT project, we have made a collaboration in order to share data. For example, for ILIA, the collaboration is more than in the way that, for example, last year we were in Uruguay working with them in order to build strategy for develop the AI in this country based on ILIA's findings. So it's very different the way that we work and we collaborate with big companies. It's also different. It's based on well, the different need that it's always with when we highlight some topic and we want to research and develop about it, we look for alliances that work with us in the same path. So this is, it's like we raise a flag with let's work together in this direction, and this is how we work with different alliances, public and private.
Antonia, there is Ben, Martin de Dios, and then Paul. Maybe we hear from them and then we'll react so we can get thoughts from those who have joined us today. Ben, do you want to go first?
Sure. I have a very general question. As the Latin American nations champion what might be characterized as a third way for AI through frameworks like the Santiago and Montevideo declarations and the various national initiatives that you identified, do you think the region is presenting itself as a global regulatory pioneer, or is it fundamentally reacting to paradigms set by the EU and or the US? I mean, I was struck in your presentations that, if one can sort of characterize a LATAM model, it couples hard legal protections for human rights with obviously a lot of focus socioeconomically for digital inclusion. And, the reason I pose that question is, is there a basis in what the region is doing to find converts among other middle powers that are, struggling to, escape the same pressures of digital colonization, if we can put it in those terms? Or is it largely reactive and sui generis?
Thanks, Ben. Well,
Antonia, sorry.
Sorry.
Antonia?
We are gonna listen all the
Yes.
all the. Okay. So, I understand.
Yes. Sorry. Martin de Dios?
Hi, everyone. Okay, thanks for the presentation to the three of the speakers. I have a question actually for Antonia regarding the LatamGPT. Just before my question, I think I can connect with something Vicente said, because we've been working on behalf of Globant, which is one of the IT's largest IT service provider, the largest IT service provider in Latam. We were working with Beatriz Busaniche from Fundación Vía Libre, particularly on on regulatory challenges for developing LLMs. That came from the work that they've been doing with the CENIA, and that was quite insightful. But well, we haven't worked in and I don't know much about the work, and that's what I'm curious to learn. That is basically, where is the LatamGPT running? Like, does it have its own cloud? Does it have its own run on its own data centers? Do you have any partnerships with companies that provide certain tokens? I'm curious to learn a bit more on the technical side, how it is working, which companies are collaborating in that line, if it's through collaboration or how it's financed. I'm curious to learn on that side. And then just a note. Sorry, I'll make two if I can. But this conversation started speaking about the encyclic from the Pope, and I think something interesting that we're working on the company on. We have an AI manifesto that came out in 2019. We're working on a new AI manifesto that it's more adjourned to the current times of technological developments. We have a point that entails exactly this, that we took from the encyclic, that is a coalition-based government, that is in the introduction in point 13. I think it's very interesting how the Pope makes this metaphor about the collaboration, when he speaks about the wall in Jerusalem and how different actors are playing in society. I think that's a good quote from the encyclic to sort of give a frame to what everyone's doing and what we're doing right here. No, so that's a question and a comment.
Thank you, Martin. Paul?
You're on mute, Paul.
Muted.
I shall start again. My questions to Alejandro, then perhaps also to others, which is, we've heard a lot today about AI governance, and we've heard about the LLMs and computing capacity. I'm interested to know what's the impact of agentic AI in Latin America. How many silos or specific silos, native AI companies are there trying to attract in that area? And where does the rush towards individual agentic AI, how does that get expressed in Latin America? What implications does it have?
Thank you, Paul. I don't know if there's another comment or question. Okay, Alex, would you like to start with this
Yes,
last
thanks.
one, or whatever you want to intervene
very
from the
briefly.
previous ones too?
Yep.
And then Antonia, you follow. Sure.
So to complement, as an intro to Paul's question, to complement what we have already said, that one of the things that may work for Latin America is to accept that the cost of not doing, which is my mantra, has already been paid. You're not going to, except for efforts like LatamGPT, we're not going to replace or compete with ChatGPT and the likes, OpenAI and so on and so forth. So use that as a platform. As has already been mentioned, this gives you the chance to work very hard on getting data centers running. There's a lot of environmental opposition. There's a lot of activist opposition to those. Or water consumption. People are not speaking to industry and finding out what the realities of that are. But the opposition is already there based on very, very, very limited and poor evidence of damages. I don't say that there's no damage, but the evidence that's being touted as, very important papers are actually very, very small case studies, like one in Mexico, in the city of Querétaro, which is completely overblown by taking a lot of space. Second, I failed to mention that Mexico is making, the government of Mexico is making a huge investment of like $300 million in buying a supercomputer that will be working like in 2 years. There's no clarity about how it will be governed as access for researchers and so forth. The government mentions 3 uses for it. One of them is developing something in AI. The other one is climate modeling, and the other one is tax evasion, using it for data analysis against tax evasion. So it's a weird thing. We hope it gets into some more reasonable shape. As for agentic and stuff like that, there are a lot of small consultancies doing this kind of work, I think, in every country, because it goes with the first strategy I mentioned, use things as platforms, existing things as platforms, instead of trying to build them from scratch and never get into place. So small consultancies and then larger IT companies are introducing AI in many ways. And one of them is, of course, agents. What we begin to read, because this is very limited, is that there's a lot of failure in these cases. There's, the project started and dead or stopped because lack of data, lack of governance, or because they were started without a clear use case. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Antonia, would you like to follow?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I want to make a comment about something that Alex mentioned in his when he was speaking. It's very interesting because it's like the paradox of AI strategies. From ILIA, we highlight always the importance of the need of more structured AI strategies. We observe the lack of a budget structure and not just paper, but as Alex mentioned. But what we have been observing also is I show in my presentation a map with with the results of the ILIA and some countries that were higher or better, doing better than the others, and those countries are the ones that are starting working in their AI strategies. So it's something. The countries that have AI strategies are doing better in ILIA than the others. So maybe it's not just a paper. And it is interesting because we don't have the answer of that. We want to understand better the phenomena because the strategies are not stronger, but countries that have strategies are better and doing better than the others. So this is something that I want to share with you, or maybe not strategies, but countries that are starting doing their RAM, which is this RAM, the instrument from UNESCO. So it's interesting this because something is moving when they started. And answering the other to Fen and Martin. Well, Fen, by now we are reacting. If we see the map of what is the worldwide map, AI is leading by US and China. And so we are the others. Well, Europe also it's doing something, but the other regions we are very little in comparison of that. So I think by now we are reacting, and this is why it's so important for us, LatamGPT, because it started to train people to change to be observer to developers. But it's a huge work, and we are not trying, as Alex said, we are not trying to compete with the bigs, just to be part of the conversation and to put LATAM bias in LATAM data to avoid or some kind of avoid bias in AI ecosystem. And to Martin, well, in LatamGPT, we have a lot of kind of partnerships. We have, for example, one of our big alliances is AWS Amazon, and they provide us a lot of cloud. So how is LatamGPT running? We work both with local and cloud power. So it's very different the way that it's a mix of powers. And financiation, how the budget of this, it's also very mixed from CENIA itself and from our alliances.
Thank you, Antonia. I would like to share some thoughts, 3 points. First, I would like to make a comment to Antonia. My hypothesis about the role of the AI strategies is that the causality goes the other way around. They have AI strategies because they have the institutional capacities, and that's why they are increasing their role. I wouldn't say that AI strategies are not important, but maybe it's a signal that they already have those capacities to go for a better development. But I do think that in an ecosystem that has a lot of players, the AI strategy is an important signal of whether the government is going to put some of the emphasis. So I think it's a very important instrument. So I don't want to downside it, but I do think that the countries that the three more like the pioneers, the three have AI strategies, but because they have those institutional capacities beforehand. But it will be interesting to try to test these ideas. Then about agentic AI, I agree with Alejandro. I think that there is a lot going on in terms of a lot of startups providing these services across the region. But I think there is a big differentiation between the fintech, those sectors that are very digital native and are using a lot of agentic AI, and the big bulk of SMEs in the region that have a lot of problems of productivity and also they are quite behind in terms of digital transformation, so they don't have AI data ready. There is an interesting survey to SMEs that was conducted at the Tela University here in Buenos Aires, where I teach. And there is a survey to SMEs, and we found that they use it a lot. They use AI a lot, but the survey also found that it's mostly used for marketing, for sales, but it's not starting to show impact in terms of productivity or using AI in a more systematic way to increase productivity. And I think the hard question of Fen about whether it's a third way or not, I agree with Antonia. I think we are mostly reacting at the time being. And I think that cooperation is taking place because there are a lot of There are non-governmental actors like CENIA or KIPU by academia. I think that those spaces of cooperation are being, at the time being, more productive than the more institutionalized declarations of governments. I think that these institutions from outside the structures of government are being very good at helping accelerate cooperation among different players. I think that there is, about this, whether it's a global regulatory pioneer, I hope that's not the space we want to look for the region. I think that there is a lot of innovation, and it's good to have more lessons learned from those experiences. But I think that we should focus on more cross learning about AI infrastructure developments and AI adoption and all the things that we were talking about in terms of building these second floor companies. I think there's a lot of room for accelerating adoption there, and I think there's a lot of work to be done in the region there. I'll stop here. I don't know if is anyone else who wants to jump in. Martin, yes, please.
Yes, on my end, because I had a look to the ILIA report, but I couldn't really check all the variables. But one concern that I have, and particularly building on a comment that Alejandro made, is that we clearly from Latin America have a hard timing. Well, we're running way behind to compete in the infrastructure. We're running well behind to compete in the LLM sector. But when we speak of AI, and we think of not just generative AI, but we just think of the era of agentic AI, I think we have a great advantage, that is the talent, particularly when we see Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, and we have a large number of, well, now Julia was also mentioning of startups that startups and SMEs that provide software services that have adjourned to the agentic era, and I think that they can really lead in this area. And we have a lot of successful cases from software providers from Latin America providing AI agentic services to the US. So I was keen to learn if that is in some way captured in the report, and how.
Thank you, Martin. Dennis? Sorry, Antonia, just a second, because Dennis would like to intervene.
If I could just ask a clarification, which is, you mentioned yourself that there's no strong Brussels effect. And my question is, to what degree do these considerations that underlie GDPR and Data Markets Act, Data Services Act, it's AI Act in Europe, that emphasize digital human rights, to what degree are these important in Latin America? And to what degree can Latin America therefore align or not align itself with the EU? Because Latin America may not be a great producer of agentic AI, but there are a lot of consumers of this service and a lot more potential consumers there, and therefore there is market power, as you've mentioned. And so the question is, how does Latin America wish to use this market power, and is there any consonance of concerns with the EU that would induce you to rally forces, or do you see some other coalition in which Latin America may be more comfortable?
Anyone
Thanks.
wants to take it? Thank you, Dennis. I think it's the big question. Yeah, Antonia, go ahead, please.
Okay, I'm gonna answer both. I'm gonna start with what Martin mentioned or asked. Well, agentic AI is not part of the report now. When we include some phenomena in ILIA, we need to have the data for all these 19, and this year is gonna be 20 countries. So it's a huge work of data. It is very important for us. We are running a study about AI agentic and, well, how investors can understand better this phenomena, but by now it's not part of the ILIA. And about what Dennis mentioned, I'm gonna try. I think it's very important and very interesting the point that you are raising, digital human rights, and how is Latin America answering to that. In order to regulation, Latin America, it's more close to what the European Union is doing, but because of that, we started to maybe copying the UA Act without understanding what are the capabilities of the region in order to have all these institutions to make the law to make the law works. So I think we have to what a region has to do or develop is to understand their power or their needings, and to define what are we or what is the north that we want to do. I think something important is that how we, as we've been spectators, we can see how it's running the thing, so we can define where we wanna go, and what is happening with the human rights and bias and in AI is something that we can define or position. We don't have a position now. I think, to follow more regulation than the others is something. I think this is maybe it's answering your question, but I'm not able to answer more than that by now.
I would just like to very quickly intervene. Here we see one of these unintended consequences of putting the normative approach first. We don't have a huge data industry, but we have very strong, almost GDPR-like data protection rules. And then we cannot get startups doing AI because access to data will lead them into trouble with these extremely rigid rules. Thanks.
I agree, Dennis, with what Alex was saying. I think that it's not a very good way to go to start from that. And I think also that in some cases, and I think Antonia was also mentioning this, the EU AI Act requires institutional capacities and enforcement capacities that the region mostly lacks. So in a way, also replicating that model is probably not viable in terms of really getting at the heart of that. I think that Brazil is trying its way, and I think that each country is trying to find its way now after the first reaction of trying to emulate the EU AI Act in some cases. And I think that there's a lot of experimentation as we discussed, and I think it's a lot of to understand also what are the impacts of what we are seeing in the region. And I think we will, I think we will finish here. Just a quick comment. We are thinking together with Dennis and with Paul about the UN Geneva Summit taking place in July, the possibility of organizing a side event on coalition-based governance. So if any of you would like to join us or are interested in this possibility, please drop us an email. So we are working on that proposal to have a discussion around these issues. So we will finish here. Thank you so much. I don't know, Vicente or Paul, if you would like to close, but thank you from my side for joining us.
Very good. Sylvia, can I say thank you so much for coordinating this seminar and helping to put it together. I think it's a powerful illustration of the inroads and efforts that GUIDE has made in Latin America, which you have led, and also this effort to be a global think tank that thinks about the issues in a global way, which, to use the language of Rome, where I am at the moment, subsidiarity proves to be the point. That different issues get dealt with at local levels, at different levels, and the result are not always as similar as they look when you look at it from very high levels. So I really appreciate that input, and that'll be particularly be an important input to the considerations that Guide is personally thinking through these issues of coalition. Thanks very much for everybody else's attendance. And to those of you online, just a reminder that we have a library of seminars on the Digital Rules Human Values channel in YouTube. This will similarly be up there shortly. And we look forward to directing you and your colleagues to that expanding library of inputs, which I think is becoming a more important resource for helping you think through global digital governance. So for now, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.